and let's get to it. Let's talk about our reality check. Tonight, in the reality check, we're talking about Russia. Yes, indeed, America, it is true. Just as the United Nations was preparing to place a series of sanctions on Russia, President Trump decided that he had not made up his mind yet. On Sunday, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, announced sanctions would be formalized in the following days. Clashing with Haley's statement, the White House later reported that Trump would be making his decision in the near future. More than a dozen Russian banks, equipment suppliers, and other organizations are being looked at and are expected to be sanctioned, including a series of Russian companies that sell helicopters to Syria. Does Trump have the guts to crack down on Russia and his good buddy, Putin? Let's talk about it. So this whole controversy, dust-up, started because it seemed to be obvious in their foreign policy, in the Trump foreign policy shop, that there was going to be sanctions on Russia issued in the next couple days. And so the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, took to the Sunday shows to say, we saw what happened in Syria. The United States is going to respond, just as the president said via tweet. We're going to respond militarily, economically, and politically. Economically, we are going to levy sanctions against Russians and any Russian companies that are providing or assisting the Syrians with aid that is allowing them to engage in this bastardly behavior to the people of Syria. Then, a day or so later, Larry Kudlow, President Trump's new economic advisor, took to a podium and said, while Nikki is doing a great job, Nikki got this one wrong. And it's really Secretary Steve Mnuchin's job to determine if there was sanctions. To that, Nikki Haley, to a select number of journalists, issued a one-line statement. I don't get confused. Which has led to quite a hubbub when it comes to Trump's foreign policy team. Who's in? Who's out? Who's up? Who's down? Who are all the players? We're going to talk about it in this segment. But before we go any further, let's listen to Senator Jeff Flake and Lindsey Graham's take on these Russian sanctions.
We have to get serious about sanctions on Russia. It's not a good sign if we're walking back statements made just a couple of days ago.
So it's been a good commander-in-chief in general, but this is a major step backwards.
I think they're right? Like, you know, over and over again, since President Trump has taken office, we've seen him do this song and dance when it comes to Russia and when it comes to Putin. Now, he will say that he's been I'm the toughest president on Putin. And most of us scratch our heads and say, oh, no, Mr. President, I think that there are some other presidents that would roll on their grave if they knew that you would say that. Mindly, Reagan, Kennedy, Nixon, LBJ. Hell, any president that was a Cold War president would say, Mr. President, we were tougher on Russia than you. But I digress. Herein lies the problem. What we have taking place in Syria is, I mean, it's beyond the point of you would say, oh, we're dealing with a civil war. We're now dealing with the fact that you have a brutal dictator, Bashar al-Assad, who is literally chemically gassing his people, right? And we, as the United States, during Barack Obama's time, issued a red line. Then Bassad's regime crossed that red line, and we, as the United States, did nothing about it. We sat quietly, and we basically ceded Syria to the Iranians and to the Russians. So here we are today, 2018, with a president who is afraid to put the hammer down on Russia, who wants to pull out of the Iran deal. All meanwhile, Iran and Russia seem to be fighting this proxy war in Syria. What makes matters even more complicated is how our military got to Syria, America, is through a law, well, through two successive laws. The 2001 and 2002, respectively, passed authorization for use of military force. Both of these laws were blank checks given to the executive branch, to the White House and to the Pentagon, to wage a war on terror that knew no borders, that knew no countries, that had no end date. This war for the past 17 years has been a blank check for military action in places like Niger, Djibouti, Nigeria, the entire Middle East, and the list goes on and on. And so now here we are in Syria. We have just launched strikes, which the Trump administration has claimed are legal because of the 2001 and 2002 passed authorization for use of military force. I know that was very complicated, but you had to understand the backstory so we could explain to where we are today. So what you have in Syria is this. You have Bashar al-Assad, which literally, if you look at a map, is probably managing 2 to 3 blocks, I'm being facetious, maybe a city or two in Syria. Syria is now sort of being run by a group of tribal leaders, ISIS, some Kurdish fighters that is backed by the United States, and it really is a powder keg. And so in order for Bashar al-Assad to gain back some power and some control with the help of both the Russian and the Iranians, he is engaging in literally acts that are in violation of foreign international agreements. He is chemically gassing his people. And don't take my word for it. The videos and the pictures of children being killed by sarin gas is enough for a moral act, or is enough to get the world disgusted. And so now it's time for the world to act. But acting has to be more than just military action. Acting has to be not only punishing al-Assad, but also going after those who are helping al-Assad, the Russians and the Iranians. Now, with Iran, things are complex because we have the Iran nuclear deal. And so because we've stalled Iran's ability to get a nuclear weapon, it is now hard for us to sort of go back in and try to deal with Iran and you know, get them out of Syria. So that's not really our stronger card. Our stronger card is to go after the Russians, because the Russians already have a weak economy because of sanctions that we've already put upon them. And Europe seems to be behind us in Iranian sanctions. And the reason why Europe is so important is because much of the Russian oil, which is where a lot of Russian economy, where the Russian economic growth comes from, or the Russian economy comes from, goes to Europe. So if Europe says we're on board, let's get these sanctions done, we've got to get them done. But standing in the way of these sanctions and standing in the way of punishing Putin and the oligarch bad actors of Russia is one man. He happens to sit in the United States. He happens to sit right here in the United States of America. His address is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. His name is Donald Trump. Donald Trump has vacillated on whether or not the United States should sanction Russia. When the United States Senate passed a sanctions agreement 99-1, the president still dragged his feet in implementing those same sanctions. We need to stand up and be the city upon the hill and be the world's leading democracy. And we need to find a way to create a peaceful solution to the civil war and the straight-out anarchy taking place in Syria. But to do that, we have got to cripple the puppet strings that are controlling Bashar al-Assad. And that means we need to begin to go after Vladimir Putin. And that means we need to slowly but surely take down the Russian economy. If we can take down the Russian economy, America, we then have a chance to save the people of Syria. And when we save the people of Syria, we will end a refugee crisis, which has turned into a crisis of epic proportion, both plaguing Europe and plaguing us right here in the United States of America. Because these people have nowhere to run. They have nowhere to go. So what we've got to do is we've got to make their homeland safe.